I shouldn't have to do what?
You shouldn't have to get that close to the mic. You should be like right here.
So, like this.
No, you're still close to it and you're just whispering.
Welcome to How to Get Away with Shakespeare. You're listening to How to Get Away with Shakespeare with Jane Fox and Gabriel Vega. Starting now. You don't like music, okay?
No, I like not music.
So, how have you been?
Oh, are we on the podcast now?
Oh yeah. I started recording a month ago.
Okay, well, I've been good. How are you?
Been great. No, I've been actually waiting for this York strike to be over.
York strike still going on. We're
7th week.
Well, on Monday it'll be the 8th week. So
Started Sunday though.
On Sunday,
yeah,
it'll be
midnight.
the 8th week.
Midnight. So Monday, I guess.
My point is that we're like almost done with the 7th week and it's still not over. And 7 is supposed to be the most powerful magical number.
And nothing happened.
But there's supposed to be a meeting on Friday morning that people are hoping will be good.
A meeting, really?
Between the ministry-appointed conciliator and the two different parties, Coopy and York.
Anyway, it doesn't matter to you.
It doesn't matter unless you go to our school, but
yeah,
there's a strike.
It's terrible. Anyway, so we've been bored out of our minds. That's why we started that podcast.
It worked out well because now we have plenty of time to work on the podcast.
So podcast 7, so 7th week. We started it on the first week of the strike.
Good thinking on our part, but
yeah. Oh wow, what are we talking about today? Oh, Almighty Caesar.
Today we're talking about rise of the fall of the journey of the destiny of the planet of the fate of the
Excuse me?
primates.
No. What are we talking about? Dawn of the Planet of the Apes today?
Yes, and
we'll be talking about Rise a little bit because Shakespeare's in the whole trilogy. Mm-hmm. But there's not a lot unless you can find more on this podcast.
Well, leave it to me.
But we'll be focused on Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is the second film. Mm-hmm. We'll focus on the third film another time because it is very Shakespeare too.
I was just going to say there's much less James Franco in the second film, so I'm always a fan of that.
Wow. Okay. Last week you bashed Ridley Scott. The other week I bashed.
Scott. I appreciate Ridley Scott.
The other week I bashed Kevin Spacey.
Well,
and now you're bashing
you gotta
James
bash
Franco.
Kevin Spacey. That's I just find him a deplorable human being.
Anyway, so Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. If you have not watched it, then why are you still here? Just to hear our lovely voice. Well, thank you.
We hope you'll come in and stay a while.
That's creepy. Okay. Anyway, so
just to confirm, it's the reboot we're watching.
Yeah, the reboot, not the 1969 film or the four movies after that, not the Tim Burton film, which is kind of okay, I guess. We are talking about the Andy Serkis trilogy. Andy
Serkis is the greatest. And I think it's one of the only times that academies actually acknowledge the work that goes into motion capture acting.
Yeah.
Right?
And we've never really talked about Julius Caesar. We've talked about it a little for Westworld, I think, because they were quotes from Julius Caesar quoted by Ford
Right.
or Abernethy in there. But now, today, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is very much Julius Caesar.
And like Westworld, they sort of do draw attention to it, which we talked about why we like that.
Yeah. Not in Dawn, but in Rise, they draw attention to it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Because
Yeah.
obviously, they name him after,
Yeah, but it doesn't start that way. It starts with John Lithgow's character being a fan of Shakespeare.
Of course, that's why they name him that.
Yeah. So, let's start with that. Okay, spoiler alert right now. So,
Spoiler alert, Julius Caesar, dies.
Yeah, it's been a long time ago. If you don't know your history, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. Spoiler alert. So Julius Caesar is not a 21st century figure. So, I want to ask you first, what do you think of Rise of the Planet of the Apes? Because it was your first time experiencing Planet of the Apes, right?
Yeah, and I loved the movie, actually. I liked it a little bit better than the second one.
Dawn.
Dawn, yes. I find it so difficult because Dawn sounds like it should be before Rise. Like you have Dawn and then you have Sunrise.
Yeah, it's explained in the third one why. In the third movie.
Yeah, but it's so cheesy.
Why?
It just seems like...
Yeah, it seems like a little bit out of place, and
It's almost like the Star Wars intro that they do every time now, and you're like, okay, well, they're sort of only doing it because it's like the Star Wars thing,
Yeah, it also feels like they picked the name as they went along.
Exactly.
And then they just tied it up in the third one, and it just feels, okay, we get it. It's Rise, Dawn, and War. We get it, but yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I think it's better than calling it I think at one point the translation, because the novel was originally in French, right?
Yes.
I think at one point they thought about calling it Monkey Planet. Planet of the Apes sounds a lot better.
Have you read the novel, by the way?
No, have you?
I've read half of it for one of my class. Because I didn't have time to finish it. But it was interesting because for the first part of the novel, you think that it's humans talking to each other.
And then it turns out to be apes.
Yeah, which is great.
That is interesting. Yeah, we actually read a very similar book in 7th grade, and I only realized after I watched the movie, I was like, was that based on this? Because it wasn't the original novel, but it was about the exact same thing.
Right.
And I'm like, who wrote this and just took credit for it and made it into a young adult novel?
Well, they do that all the time.
Well, yeah.
Let's be fair. That's why your
if you
podcast is
can get away with
out
it.
to get away with Shakespeare. They take literature and copy it all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, that's more recent than Shakespeare. He's in the public domain.
For sure.
Anyway, so I liked the movie a lot. Despite
Why did
James
you
Franco.
like the Rise better than Dawn?
Oh, it wasn't that I didn't like Dawn. I just thought Rise was interesting because it was I liked the scenes with the apes in sort of the sanctuary, quote unquote. I just liked watching them in their own community, and of course I really enjoyed seeing Tom Felton being evil again.
Harry Potter fan here.
Well, I mean, yeah, but he's also just a good actor.
Yeah, he's great.
Best one to come out of the films.
Yeah, and what I liked about this movie too. Now we're talking about Rise, but in Rise, there's kind of a redemption for the first Planet of the Apes, the 1969 film. So if you suggest, let's consider for a while that the intention of the filmmaker was that he wanted to talk about racism against black people. And the apes, let's say the apes represent black people, and the humans represent white people because they're white. All of them are in the film. So it's kind of a reversal in a way to talk about racism. Mm-hmm. And if you take those images taken in that time with the hoses and stuff, so it's kind of touching the issue of racism. And my point is, in Rise, there's this scene where Caesar is taking the O's and putting it on Tom Felton. And now it's not the same as in the first movie, because in the first movie the apes were the villains, and now the humans are the villains.
Right.
Which is interesting.
And
it's about animal cruelty too in this movie.
It would be interesting too to look at. I mean, we have the two eminent ape leaders, and I do wonder, could it be a parallel for Martin Luther King and Malcolm X?
Yeah, for sure.
But if it is, I feel like it's very problematically depicted, because Malcolm X, I mean, I wrote an essay about this, is essentially he's vilified by American media, The only thing we learned about him in history class is that he promoted violence. So I feel like if it is a parallel, then I would like there to be a little bit more ambiguity in there.
Speaking of the 1969 film, and if we're talking about racism, someone photoshopped a picture of the Obamas with the faces of the apes, which is kind of awful. The things people do to Barack Obama, it's just not acceptable. That's a totally different topic. It doesn't have anything to do with Shakespeare. But the point is, I think Shakespeare, just like Planet of the Apes, deals with issues like colonialism, women, racism, just like the Planet of the Apes are doing. 1969, let's suggest, some might disagree with me on that, but it focused on racism.
Right, where it uses images associated with it, definitely.
And the reboot, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that. And the reboot deals with animal cruelty and the way we treat animals. What do you think of that, of the reboot dealing with animal cruelty?
I mean, you do get, the testing in the laboratory, which is a very real problem. We use animals to test beauty products and medication, and it's I don't know. I liked that James Franco was just I'll test it on my father. I don't care. It
reminded me of the way Caliban is treated in The Tempest a little bit, like an animal.
He is treated like an animal, made to live in a cave and everything.
Yeah, and then the third one, which we'll not talk about today, but let me just mention it. They have the apes working, so it's kind of, they treat the apes like slaves.
Right, and I mean there even is that scene in the second movie where they put the humans into the cage and they say, now you see how it is, which is an interesting scene.
It's also interesting, and then we'll talk about Shakespeare, but for reversal, in 1969 film, you feel for the human who don't have a voice, and then in this reboot, you feel for the apes, and you don't care as much for the human as you should.
Though, I think towards the end of the second movie, as Caesar sort of realizes that, he has that great line, we're basically the same creature,
But so. It's funny how you relate more to the apes, or you root for the apes, and your species is dying.
Yeah. Well, they have that cute little ape baby. How can you not like that?
So, let's talk about Rise for a minute. John Lithgow's character, a.k.a. Charles Rodman, is a big Shakespeare fan. And in the first 15 minutes, Will comes home, and Irina, the nurse, tells him that his father is having a good day because he has been quoting Shakespeare. And yeah, he's a big Shakespeare fan, so it's a good day for him. And it's a short scene, but in the original script online, it is a completely different scene, and we learn that something else about Shakespeare and the fandom of his father. So let's read it. I'll play. Well, you play Walter because he was named Walter in the first script.
Sure.
Hey, Dad. Walter looks up, whispers.
John, is that you?
It's me, Will.
As thou dost, Anthony.
He hears no music. No music. He's been doing that all day. A homemaid enters, grabs her coat. This is Irina. He found an old book of his. She pulls a worn paperback of Julius Caesar from Walter's pocket. He snatches it from her, puts it back. I had no idea you liked Shakespeare so much, Mr. Walter. My mother was the one. She liked Shakespeare. What do you make of that?
You know, it's interesting. I guess his name really can't be a coincidence.
Yeah.
William. So you feel like they named both of them after Shakespeare-related stuff, William and Caesar. It's like they're both his kids, right?
Right. Oh, that's just so interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
I think of everything, so.
No, that's really cool. So, yeah, so you can really see, I think it's really introducing the Shakespeare influence right from the beginning, especially that it happened so early on.
Yeah, it's one of the first lines, really.
And then Charles sees the ape for the first time. He's full of joy. Holds him up like Lion King style.
La Svenja.
Yeah. He holds him like royalty, contemplating him. And he says, "But as for Caesar, kneel down, and wonder." That is, of course, a quote from Antony and Cleopatra, Act 3, Scene 2. What do you think of that, in that context?
I mean, in Dawn, they do literally kneel down in front of him. So it's sort of a foreshadowing that he's going to sort of be their leader. The
emperor, or the leader, the king. And we should all kneel down because he's so strong and he's so great. Great Caesar.
But, I mean, on the other hand, in Julius Caesar, there are a lot of these images of people kneeling down. And I think the one most people remember is when they're kneeling down to put his blood on their hands.
Right.
So that it's all of them who committed it. And they're kneeling down and, you know, rubbing the blood on their hands, that kind of thing. So it's sort of a foreshadowing of that, too.
And then John Lithgow just names him Caesar out of the blue.
You do wonder, though, why he didn't name him, like, Julius. Or, like, you know, a character who doesn't get murdered. Like.
But I feel like also, as soon as he names him Caesar, there's a path created for him. There's something. There's an idea behind the name that's so powerful that's gonna like make Caesar who he is.
Right, and that's actually something explored by a lot of Shakespeare critics. Mostly Linda Charnes. She talks about the idea of sort of notorious identity that, especially in relation to Antony and Cleopatra, it's just that these characters are so well known. It's sort of like, it's not even really an exploration of like their ethics or their morals. It's like their name almost. It's like their celebrity. So how do you deal with running a play that's based on this character more than anything else? That's based on this person who there's already so much information about. How do you deal with having Caesar on the stage when everyone already knows that he's going to be a leader and then die? So I think it's sort of the same question brought up, you know, that you just mentioned, where he's essentially destined because of his name, but we're dealing with the same thing. So we know that he has to rise up and then perhaps fall.
Dawn.
What?
Dawn. Rise. Dawn. And then war.
Kill me.
No, yeah, you're right. Rise and then fall. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then there is the final connection to Julius Caesar. We see a copy of the actual play of Julius Caesar in the room. So I guess it's really, the first movie is really establishing that it's taking from Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. And it's preparing you so much for the second movie, which we'll discuss now.
Yes, yeah. It's beyond just references. It's a restaging almost.
So Rise introduces the series relationship with Shakespeare very clearly in the first one. This film is very much the play Julius Caesar. With Caesar as the ape now in power, another ape forms a group to take Caesar down. And then, just like Brutus in the play, because Koba does not like humans at all for what they did. It's not the same, but it's the idea of someone just wanting to take down Caesar for his ideas and his power and this point of view, the way he does things, just like Brutus. So Koba does not like humans at all for what they did to him, and Caesar wants to trust humans. Not in the beginning, but he begins to trust humans again, and Koba doesn't like that. So just like Brutus, Koba does not believe in Caesar's leadership, so he wants to take him down.
And that's something I think, a pattern sort of that we see throughout Shakespeare. You know, this pattern of
Right.
a leader being overthrown, like we see it in Richard III, we see it in Macbeth, we see it in The Tempest.
Titus.
Yes, even in Titus, would you see the establishment of the leader and then him being taken down, all of that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something Shakespeare has a lot of interest in writing about.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, a lot of the plays. So I guess the thing is, this film is definitely most related to Julius Caesar, but it's interesting in the ways that it is different from Macbeth and the others, you know?
But it's very similar to Macbeth also in a way.
Absolutely.
Because the play Julius Caesar itself is very Macbeth, because the ghost of the one you killed and remorse and the way they deal with similar themes. It's also that in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. It's very Macbeth. It's very Julius Caesar. It also deals with remorse.
I mean, I see it very much like Richard III is sort of the tale of a man's life, looking at him as the killer.
Yeah.
And then we're looking at Julius Caesar, the victim.
Right.
And then we move on to Macbeth, which is completely about the murderer's mind, you know? So it's sort of, Julius Caesar is interesting because he dies in the middle of the play, you know? So it's sort of
just like in the movie, though.
Exactly, that's what I mean. So there's sort of like that middle climax.
Of course, Caesar doesn't die, really.
But you're led to believe he does, so it's... Yeah.
But like Caesar, he reappears, though.
Yes, but in a different way because he's actually alive.
Yeah. And interestingly, in the play, to prepare for this, I've watched the Globe Theater production. And Strato, who kills Brutus in the play, is played by the same actor who plays Caesar. Which is interesting. Because if we're thinking about Caesar, the ape, coming back to life and killing Koba... You are no ape. Well, it's kind of a wink to that in a way. It's funny.
It's also interesting. I think that in the original production, the actor who first played like the inaugural Caesar also played Polonius in the first production of Hamlet, which is interesting to think of this one character playing both roles. Like,
wow.
I mean, they both get killed on stage. They both sort of get dragged off.
Anyway, you should read Julius Caesar, and to do that, you should try Audible.
It is on Audible.
So today's podcast is sponsored by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Shakespeare. Over 180 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And for you, the listeners of the How to Get Away with Shakespeare podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download and with a 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You should do Archangel Shakespeare if you want to listen to Julius Caesar before this podcast. Or you're in the middle of it, so I guess you have already read Julius Caesar or not, or you're interested about reading it. Sorry for the spoilers, but you should expect that by now. Well, yeah, you should absolutely check out Audible. What have you been reading?
I've been listening to a book that I read in class last semester. It's called Leaving the Atocha Station by Ben Lerner. And it's also narrated by him, which is interesting. And it's about...
I don't know that book at all.
It's about a writer who gets sort of like a grant to live, or like a fellowship to live in Spain and Madrid for a year. But then there's the Madrid bombings.
Wow.
So it's sort of about... But he's this weird character. Like, he's constantly second-guessing himself and like trying to figure out how to manipulate people. And it's just a very strange novel. So it's really interesting to hear the author read it.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's mostly what I've been listening to, other than I've been listening to The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje.
That's the movie, right? That's also a movie,
I think it is a movie. I haven't seen
with
it.
Ralph Fiennes.
Oh, I like Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah.
Lord Voldemort.
Lord Voldemort. Tom Marvolo Riddle.
You're starting the fourth book, right? You get to see him soon.
I can't wait for that scene. That's my favorite scene in the movies when he comes back.
My God, you know what would be amazing? A Harry Potter audiobook narrated by Ralph Fiennes.
Oh, yeah.
I would 100% listen to that. J.K. Rowling, Please sign them up.
But, yeah, we can talk about Harry Potter in another episode of How to Get Away with Shakespeare.
We'll do Harry Potter soon, once Gabe finishes the books.
Yeah. So, you should definitely check out Audible to read Julius Caesar. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Shakespeare. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Shakespeare for your free audiobook.
And thank you very much to Audible for sponsoring this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. All right, back to the Planet of the Apes.
Now that the mid-roll ad is over.
Dawn, not fall.
Dawn of the Planet. I wasn't saying it was...
Oh, well. I'm going to have to beat that. Do you know that?
I have a dirty mouth.
Okay. So, let's talk about more Dawn for a bit. What do you make of the comparison between Koba and Brutus? And is Koba, if we're saying, yeah, he's Brutus for story-wise and what Brutus does to Caesar. But Koba, to me, he's more of a Iago figure. He's more of a...
or even a Cassius.
Yeah. So, like a mischievous character that manipulates situations, and just the way he shoots Caesar, the ape, and then makes everyone believe that the humans shot Caesar.
Exactly, yeah. He uses the violence for his own purposes. And I think he ultimately has no remorse. So I feel like Brutus, for all his faults, has remorse.
Right. He's more like a Macbeth figure, Brutus, too.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see, like, that's sort of the evolution of that psychologically disturbed figure who regrets his actions and is tormented by the things he's done.
But Koba is not a Macbeth figure at all.
No, I mean, I definitely get the feeling that if Caesar had helped him back up, he probably would have thrown him back off the ledge, you know, so.
Yeah. But also, Koba, yes, he's made villainous, he's made mischievous, he's manipulating, but he has a backstory too. And we understand why he does it. He doesn't like humans at all because he's been tortured by them in a lab in the first movie. And we understand that.
You know, I almost would argue that he's very much a Richard III character. I mean, he even has sort of the physical deformity like Richard has.
Right.
The arm and the leg. And he has, you know,
the scar.
The eye, yeah.
Just like Scar.
Just like Scar.
The Lion King.
And Richard ultimately has no remorse, and he's very manipulative. And he sort of seems to have this sense of, you know, it's his right to have the throne. We don't ever see Koba try to apologize or explain his actions. It's just, you know, like Caesar says, apes will look for the strongest branch. So...
By the way, if you hear noises right now, we tried to keep my dog quiet, but that's the only way we can keep her quiet. She's chewing on cheese or cheese curd. What do you call him?
Himalayan yak cheese.
Anyway, so if you hear noises, I'm so sorry. But that's the only way we can keep her quiet.
She's very cute. She's a Cavalier King Charles, so don't blame her.
Anyway, so what are your notes saying? What did you want to talk about?
Yeah, one of the really interesting sort of images in Julius Caesar is when Calpurnia...
Julius Caesar's wife.
Yeah, and she tells Caesar that she has this dream about him as a statue, and there are these sort of spurts of blood shooting out of him in every direction, and the people are washing their hands in it. And then... one of the other people, you know, he's obviously very concerned. She tells him to stay home. You know, she doesn't want him to go outside today. It's dangerous. It's the Ides of March. And then one of the other people says, oh, no, you're interpreting it wrong. What it means is that, you know, he is going to have this great life force and the people are going to be, you know, benefiting from it and coming up and washing their hands and, you know, and it's good for all of Rome. All of Rome is benefiting from your legacy. And, of course, it's the question of interpretation, which I think is big in the movie. You can sort of see how there are stories being spun and people are manipulating the truth. Like, for example, with the ape Koba leaving the gun there and manipulating people into thinking it was the humans.
Right.
It's sort of the question of how you look exactly at things.
And that's very Iago-like because Iago is all about the way you look at things in the way. Because he makes Othello believe that
the gun is such a handkerchief move.
Yeah, Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know, Iago sort of tricks Othello into checking that the handkerchief he gave to Desdemona was still in her possession, and she had given it, or no, it was actually taken from her by Amelia, but he tricked him into thinking that she had given it to him like as a symbol of her favor.
Yeah.
And it's sort of very similar to the trickery going on with the gun, because Koba actually takes it, but then it's sort of symbolic of that mistrust.
Yes, absolutely. And that's also happening in Cymbeline with Iachimo and the note that he gives, what's his name?
Posthumous?
Posthumous, yeah. Did you say post? Posthumous?
You can say either.
Yeah, you can say either. That was just funny, the way you said it.
Fine.
Because Deanne Williams says posthumous. But
well, she was trained at Oxford, so it's probably right.
And Yale. So, yeah, he's very Iachimo. He's very Iago, as opposed to Brutus, who was just very Macbethy and remorseful and villainous. And yeah, the handkerchief is very gun-like. So yeah, I wanted to talk about Antony crying over Caesar's death. Just like the apes cry for Ape Caesar's death. They believe he's dead, but he's not. But Antony in the play gives a whole speech just mourning over Caesar's body. And it was very like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, because they all end up fighting because they believe Caesar's dead.
Right.
It starts a war, just like in Julius Caesar, which is interesting, an interesting comparison. Mm-hmm. And I believe Antony at some point says, "You showed your teeth like apes."
Interesting. Because, yeah, we do see them.
He compares them to animals. He says
exactly.
a lot of. He has a lot of comparison. It's not just apes, but there's this line that he compares them to apes.
You do almost wonder, like, if someone was reading that and went, "Huh." No.
Of course, they read that.
No, but I mean, like, did someone read that and go, "What if we actually had apes?" You know what I mean?
No, but I mean they, like the writer clearly focused on Julius Caesar, well, so he might have read that.
Exactly, yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, yeah, it's great. That's actually better."
But what do you think of Caesar's ghost coming back in the play?
Well, it's kind of funny that happens because Caesar comes back too to life. So it's kind of also a moment taken from Julius Caesar. But in this case, they knew they were going to have 3 movies, so he had to come back to create the Planet of the Apes. But it's funny that they did that. He's kind of a ghost also, Caesar, in that movie. Because we know as the audience that he's alive, but it's funny that he's kind of a ghost when the apes still believe he's dead, but he's not he's not dead to us. He's kind of a ghost in a way, which is funny. But the fact that he comes back to life in Julius Caesar as a ghost is, yeah, exactly the same moment in the film.
You know, I was almost thinking that he would end up dying, but it would be an image of him, sort of like a ghost, that would be the reason. Like, I thought, for example, they would show the videotape of him, you know, because he watches the tape of him as a baby ape being taught English and cared for and loved by Will, James Franco's character. And
which you like, who you like so much.
And I thought it would be something like that. But then he actually did survive, so I was like, this is already different, because if we look at it like a 3-act play where Caesar is dying in the middle, this would be the middle, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah. I would argue, though, that it's a 5-act play.
Well, yes. You know what I mean? If we look at the movies as a 3-act play. It's
funny, though, to think... I was thinking about this as I watched... Because I watched the 3 movies for this. And... as opposed to someone...
I haven't seen the 3rd movie yet.
But... as I was watching them all at the same time, it felt very much like a 5-act play. If you think about it as one movie.
Now, can I ask you, when in the 3rd movie does Caesar die?
He dies at the very end. That's the last shot of him. And then they walk to what is in the 1969 film, The Planet of the Apes.
Now, that's interesting because it actually changes the genre of the play. Because if the main character dies right at the end, it becomes a tragedy.
It is, yeah.
So it's interesting because Julius Caesar is not a tragedy.
It is not, because the play says the tragedy of Julius Caesar.
But it's not, because he dies in the middle. It's very different, because usually a tragedy is sort of teleologically driven by getting to the end where he dies.
Right. Okay. Or we could argue that it's actually the tragedy of Brutus.
And that, I would say, is probably a better name for it. If it was named Brutus and Cassius, or just,
But that would be very Macbeth. That's
which
why
is,
they
think,
changed
where
that.
It's going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's why they
You do
changed
wonder
that.
why Planet of the Apes isn't called Caesar,
Well, that's another thing, because you want to... The whole points of the movie is how did we get to the Planet of the Apes?
Right, but I mean, it seems almost like it's more about Caesar's life in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the first movie is so much about him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So if we think about the tragedy of Brutus, it would be the tragedy of Caesar in here. That would actually fit more the Planet of the Apes than it would actually fit Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. Julius Caesar is barely in the play, by the way. It's all about Brutus and Cassius.
But they dragged his body around constantly, so even after he's dead, they're like, here's old Julius.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah, he's basically a prop.
Yeah.
Which is sort of echoed in the films, because he's sort of like being carried around when he's, been shot. But he still has his voice then, and he talks to them.
Which is a link to Koba in the third movie, because Koba is a ghost in the third movie. So it's kind of funny that they did that. We'll not talk too much about the third movie. We'll save it for another podcast. But if we're talking about Julius Caesar right now, because I don't think the third movie is Julius Caesar that much. But if we're talking about Julius Caesar and the fact that Caesar reappears as a ghost in the play, and then Koba reappears as a ghost in the third movie, it's very like the play.
Mm-hmm. And I mean,
yeah.
Something interesting in Shakespeare is always the question of, who is the rightful ruler? Because since Caesar was the leader when Koba tried to kill him, that was attempted regicide. But because Koba was the leader when Caesar killed him or let him die, that was sort of also some type of regicide. So it's the question of, in Macbeth, that Duncan actually had been fighting a rebellion at the time, and he probably took power from someone else, the same way Richard took power from, Edward or whoever, and the person before him took power from the person before. So it's who really is the just ruler, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's interesting that Koba reappears as a ghost, and Caesar reappears as a ghost. Caesar is the title of the play. Koba is not the title is not the main character. It's interesting because when we were talking about the tragedy of Brutus as the title,
right?
That would be the tragedy of Koba, I guess, for the movie. But it's interesting that it would be Brutus in the play and Koba in the movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's sort of a reversal.
I agree, but Koba is so far from Brutus that it's like, oh, you know what, though? He has a very similar death to Richard in one of the Richard III films, where he falls backwards, like with his hands out.
Yeah. No, but that's interesting. But the fact that we find it weird that it's the tragedy of Julius Caesar, mm-hmm. the way we would find it weird that it would be the tragedy of Koba.
Exactly, yeah.
Because let's be honest, they're side characters. They're not main characters at all.
Right.
So it's kind of a reversal to that. It's about Caesar. The movies are about Caesar.
But it's interesting that you bring up that they're sort of like side characters, because I think it's sort of the way that the play is structured, where, we even get the scene where they all, instead of, putting the blame on one person, they form themselves as a mob and all take responsibility.
Right.
And that's very much the way that the play is. There's no one single antagonist. There's so many different players sort of taking part in the action. And I think it's that way with the movie too. We have the good human, the bad human, we have the family of the good human, and they're all sort of major characters, but there's no one protagonist except for Caesar, but it's sort of tied between him and the main human.
Right. That's interesting then. But no, the fact that Koba thinks Caesar is a bad leader.
Yes, yeah, because he does not want to kill humans unless it's necessary to defend themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on from this. That's very interesting, though, in terms of titles. So you think, is it, by the way, is Julius Caesar a history play or is it a tragedy?
I feel like it's some weird mix between the two.
I think it's a history play.
Mm-hmm.
I think so, because it has, like, Henry IV, or it has really history in it.
It's true, but, I mean, there's so much of, like, the tragic Brutus character that I'm like, could be either, you know?
But if we think about the movies, it's the Planet of the Apes movies, it's even more interesting, because these are the prequels. Right. It's like the history of the Planet of the Apes.
And it's even the history of his life in the first movie, you know, how Caesar came to be.
Yeah. How
the simian flu was created.
Yeah, so it's interesting, yeah, when thinking about if Julius Caesar is a history play versus the Planet of the Apes. Because it's not a tragedy. The Planet of the Apes, I wouldn't argue that it's a tragedy. You might argue otherwise. But I feel like it's more about history, how as the Planet of the Apes began. Yes, Caesar dies in the third movie, spoiler alert, but I don't think it's very much a tragedy. It was very much a happy ending for the apes. They have a planet to themselves. And humans can't speak. Humans become cattle, as the colonel says.
Right.
But we'll talk about the third movie another time. I wanted to ask you a very interesting question, I think, in terms of women in this Planet of the Apes thing. It feels like we've got back to bloodline in this thing. Women feel like the wives, the girlfriends. I don't know. They don't feel that important in these Planet of the Apes film. And I was thinking also, before you say something, I was thinking, what if Caesar was a woman? That would have been an interesting choice if a woman had started the old Planet of the Apes thing.
I mean, I do like...
Oh, you mean the wife of Jason Clarke's character, Malcolm,
yes,
Ellie,
yeah.
Kerry Russell's character.
Yes, I liked her character. I liked that she was a medic, and I feel like that character could have had a bigger role.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and it might be part of the problem might be that you can't tell the gender of the apes. You know what I mean? So when they're all running around, they could be female apes running around with machine guns, but...
Yeah, I don't know. It feels already like a patriarchal society.
Yes, the patriarchy of the rise of the Planet of the Apes.
And I wonder how different for the world to see a woman create the Planet of the Apes, a woman ape. Because it feels like we're mirroring the human society a lot, and what they've done. It would have just been different, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we do see like the female ape Cordelia as like the mother, and we don't really see her in any other role. So it's very much.
Yeah, and it mirrors the problem with women in Shakespeare. It's funny.
But there are like two women in the entire movie, and one is an ape and one is a human.
Let's be fair. Maurice is played by a woman, but he's not a woman.
Yeah, so it's like, and he's not voiced by a woman.
No, in the third, no.
So,
I don't think so.
So it's sort of interesting because female characters, of course, would have been played by boys. So you could talk about that aspect of it.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
A male is played by a woman, but I don't know if that's what they were intending.
I think they made up for it by having motion capture actresses playing apes, but they still play males, which is interesting in terms of Shakespeare, because as you said, males were playing women at the time. Weird comparison, but it still has a problem with women. And
I don't think every movie has to have a female lead character, though. I mean, it would be nice to have some.
But if you do it in the three movies, like the villain is not even a woman. My problem is they're always the girlfriend. They're always
the girlfriend. Yeah.
The let's be fair. In the second movie, we could take Malcolm out, and Carrie Russell could be the human that Caesar relates to.
And she would be fantastic at it because Carrie Russell's an amazing actress.
Yeah. So it's always the girlfriend, or it's always the wife, or it's always even Caesar's wife is not that important. She gives birth. That's her whole role. And then she dies in the third movie.
Great, yeah.
So anyway, we should move on to speaking of women, the name Cordelia. Where is that from, Jane?
You mean from King Lear?
Cordelia from King Lear. So it's interesting that they chose that. It was unintentional because in the 1969 film, there's a name Cordelia, I think. Or I know for a fact that there is a Cordelius, and that is Caesar's child in the third movie. Well, we see him in the second too.
Little baby.
So yeah, the baby of Caesar that you see as a baby in the second movie, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, who is much older in the third movie. He's named Cordelius, which is very Shakespeare first, a very Shakespearean name, but it's also tying to the 1969 film because Cordelius is a character in the 1969 film, which is interesting. But the point is Cordelia is a character also in Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the choices of names is interesting in terms of Shakespeare.
Yeah, do you see anything like any connections with King Lear or like the idea of children and their parents?
Oh, now that you mentioned, no, I knew that. That's one of my notes. Did you just read one of my notes?
Did you see me look at the paper?
No. As you mentioned it, we can talk about it in the third movie.
In the third movie?
Because that's prominent in the third movie. The idea of search of children, I think, is prominent in King Lear and in War of the Planet of the Apes.
I mean, that's also how the series starts, right? They don't know why Bright Eyes, is so aggressive, and they realize she wasn't actually being aggressive. She thought they were going to harm her child, who, of course, is Caesar.
Right.
So it sort of starts with that same note of the connection between parent and child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Anyway, so that's all the time we have this week. So thank you for listening to us this week. Again, we didn't say it for this podcast a lot, but we usually say it a lot. You can email us at howtogetawaywithshakespeare@gmail.com. Please email us.
Please email us, yeah.
We haven't received any email since the first podcast, the second podcast, yeah. And you can tweet us at our account.
Yeah, you know where to find us.
Just say it again.
HTGAWS_podcast on Twitter, or Vega Gabe, or Jane the Fox. We'll respond to any of them.
And we have a Facebook page, Instagram,
YouTube. If you want to go on there, leave a like.
So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Audible for sponsoring this podcast. Mm-hmm. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The quote. So I again picked the quote this week because I thought it was interesting when I saw it. I think it relates to the third movie also, but it's interesting when thinking about the second movie. So let's read the quote and then I'll explain it, I guess. So it says, "O Julius Caesar, thou art mighty yet. Thy spirits walks abroad and turns our swords in our proper entrails." So I think it's interesting when Koba makes the apes believe that the humans killed Caesar and then brings war to the humans. Then all the Caesar's friends, the remaining of Caesar's friends, turn against Koba and turns their sword again, because they believe in Caesar, not Koba. It's interesting.
That sort of leads us to the question of, are we with the conspirators or the revengers? which I think there's a lot of revenge in that last movie. So next week, or next time we talk about it, we'll touch on that.
Yeah. So, Caesar's legacy lives on forever, dead or alive.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you liked this podcast and want more, go on iTunes and search for How to Get Away with Shakespeare. We're also on SoundCloud, Spreaker.com, and YouTube. Again, thank you very much for listening.